Today I will tell you the story about the twits by Roald Dahl, illustrated by Quentin Blake. There are 4 characters in the book: Mr. Twit, Mrs. Twit, the roly-poly bird, and the Muggle monkeys. There were lots of hairy faced men, and there was Mr. Twit in lots of the Mr. Twit was the one man of the crowd of the hairy-faced men, and he had lots of hair, and he looked like this. And he had always foods on his beard and hair like this. And Mrs. Twit had a glass eye, and she was Mr. Twit's wife, and she looked like this. And Mrs. Twit always did tricks with her glass eye because she could take it out and put it back on. And to pay Mrs. Twit's trick to Mr. Twit got a big frog and put it under Mrs. Twit's sheet. And Mrs. Twit fainted because of the frog. And Mrs. Twit caught some worms in the yard and put it in the bowl of spaghetti, and only in her husband's bowl. And for paying this, Mr. Twit did a very clever trick. The trick was when Mrs. Twit was sleeping, Mr. Twit took Mrs. Twit's walking stick and put a piece of wood, and it was no thicker than a penny, and he put it all night, and the walking stick grew longer and longer. And Mr. Twit said Mrs. Twit had the dreaded shrinks. And Mr. Twit said there was only one cure for the shrinks, and it was to be stretched. And in the yard, Mr. Twit had all the materials to do the stretching, and he tied Mrs. Twit's ankles and and placed it on the ground. And Mr. Twit tied 60 balloons on Mrs. Twit, and the balloons wanted to go up and up, but they couldn't. But Mr. Twit took a knife and cut the string, and Mrs. Twit flew away. And Mrs. Twit bited the strings of balloons, and she came down and down. So there were 4 monkeys in the yard. And there was a sticky glue named Hogtight, and it was very sticky. And it was bird pie day, and Mr. Twit painted the glue on the tree, and the birds stuck on the tree. And Mr. Twit caught the birds, and Mr. Twit and Mrs. Twit always said to be upside down to the monkeys. And there was a roly-poly bird, and the monkey named Mugglewump caught the key, and they got free. And the birds went to the roof of Mr. Twit and Mrs. Twit's house. And Mugglewump had a plan. They had lots of balls of Hogtight glue. And they went to the living room, and they wanted to pay for the upside down circus practice of Mr. Twit and Mrs. Twit, and they were on the town because they wanted to buy guns. And the monkeys and birds put everything on the ceiling with the glue. Like this. And when Mr. Twit and Mrs. Twit came into the house, they 2 birds had a paintbrush on their claws, and they dropped some glue on Mr. Twit and Mrs. Twit's head. And when they went into the living room, they saw what was happened. They thought they were standing on the ceiling and looking down at the floor. And Mr. Twit said to stand upside down, and they were straight back up. But the sticky glue, the 2 birds did the job. they stuck on the floor because of the glue. And a man called Fred, Mr. Twit and Mrs. Twit became shrinking and shrinking. And a man called Fred went to the Twits' house, but the Twits were all shrinking like this. My opinion